I think, okay, everybody, I think we're going to start. I've been told that it's better if you can stay on mute while we do the talk, just because otherwise it connects into each person if there's any sound or anything. So that's the only bit of housekeeping I've got to do. So how are we doing? So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. This is our first in a series of one-to-one talks. This is the first time I've done this one, so I'll start again. So this is our RDInsights. It's a series of one-to-one online conversations that give you a chance to get inside the heads of world-leading designers and innovators. 6 live encounters, and our groups are, the first one tonight is Charlie, Paton and Elora Hardy, and then we've got Michael Wolf and Malcolm Garrett in 2 weeks' time, and Roger Law and Paul A. Constable, Alison Brooks and Kim Collin, Michael Marriott and Ben Terrett, and then Marion Dischar and Tom Gould in December. So they're all RDIs, and Elora's an honourable RDI, and it's our first time of getting the people together and just talking about what they do and their impact of their work on the world. So so tonight I'm happy to introduce Charlie Paton and Elora Hardy, and as I said, they're both royal designers and whose innovations in architecture and agriculture are changing the world. So a little background on Charlie. Charlie began his career as a lighting designer and maker of special effects. His fascination with light and plant growth led to the Seawater greenhouse concept. Charlie is at the forefront of designing innovative technology to create ideal growing conditions for crops in hot, arid environments, and has received numerous awards for his contributions to the field of sustainability and design. And I think now you'll see why we're pairing the two together. And Elora Hardy. Elora is the founder of Ibuku, a pioneering firm creating bespoke bamboo homes in her native Bali. The team she leads has built over 90 bamboo structures in 9 years, buildings that are so naturally beautiful that they promote peace and well-being in everyone that experiences them. So, I think I'm going to hand over now. I think that's sort of a little introduction, and I'm going to hand over now to the two speakers, and then we're going to have questions after each presentation, and then we're going to have a discussion at the end. Okay, welcome Elora and Charlie.
Hello everyone. This is bamboo. Can you all see my my presentation images? They're showing up? Great. This is bamboo here in Bali. This is my dad, John. That's a clump of Dendrocalamus asper niger. It will produce 10 or more poles of sustainable timber every year. Now, a decade ago, my parents, they gathered a group of just pioneering people from around the world and from Bali, and they set out to build a truly green school. The material that met that green promise, it was bamboo, but to utilize it, we actually had to set a whole new industry in motion. Harvest, test, treat, process, and then design, allowing us ultimately to build permanent structures. What resulted is really a new way of building. And for the kids at Green School, I think it's a promise to the kids of a bountiful future. So over this decade, we've created over 100 unique structures across Bali and more overseas as well. And in the absence of a tried and true vocabulary of bamboo architecture, we have really invented our own rules, which is convenient for me. Trained as a fine artist, I don't know any of the rules of architecture. And I worked with every material I could, really, from ceramics to Super 8 film. So when I ultimately chose bamboo, I knew enough to stop and listen, not for what I imagined creating as an artist or a designer, but rather to understand perhaps what the bamboo wanted to become. So the thing is, this material is just a marvel of engineering. Neil Thomas of Atelier 1, he compares it to carbon fiber. So we often use those strong compressive poles intact. And engineers, they know that, I'll just wait for a pause there for a mute. So engineers, they know that no material is invincible. And for that matter, every person, even engineers, have vulnerabilities. So we really must design for the strengths of the material to protect it. This also derives the form. Those overhanging roofs, they protect the structure, keeping the rain and UV away. Now, slicing the bamboo, it unleashes its really flexible potential. Here, wrapped bundles form that structure, and we laminate the splits into round moon door frames. See, we're stepping into a whole new world of shells by laminating splits into arches. This is the Green School, Tulum, in Mexico. It's an elastically bent grid shell, engineered by Neil Thomas, RDI. This is, I think, the first time we're sharing an image of it anywhere. So there is a future that is opening up to bamboo that is beyond the hand craftsmanship that we've relied on in Bali. With laminate, we can have the consistency, the control, the efficiency to work internationally and at scale. And along the way, always we are refining our listening and our feeling. This TV room, built 9 years ago, it had started out on our plans as 4 walls and a ceiling to enclose a part of the living room. And on site, that just didn't feel right. It's about a continuity. See, buildings on terraced ravines, they just can't be rectangular. So we curve and nestle into the contours of the site, maybe to remind ourselves that we belong. And a curving house, what belongs inside of the curves of a house, it needs terraced steps. And it needs a door that feels like a portal into a new world, into the world of that building. And always, it comes back to us, to the humans who go into these spaces. We want to find comfort. And the form of a building, I believe it can hold us, it can hug us. We've all now recently felt ourselves stretching the limits of health and safety for the simple joy of a hug. And for the chance to get outside, to be close to nature. For some time though, the question that we've been chasing here at Ibuku is, how can we humans find a safe space for ourselves within nature? And getting down to it, how can we remember actually that we are nature? Yes, we need shelter. And we've spent forever building to protect ourselves. And finally, we have taken it too far in the world. As a default, we designed to shut ourselves off. Thermostats, while in many climates absolutely a necessity, have become a way of thinking. And convenience, and power, and control, it feels good. But as a way of thinking is to the point clearly where it is at the expense of the future. And not only that, it is at the expense of our experience of the present moment. It's at the expense of our experience of place and time of day and season, and the air. But to let go of the reliance, the consistent reliance on a protective shell, we need to know that we will get back somehow more than that control that we're giving up. What we get back, it's simple things. It's a connection, a reconnection. Maybe the texture of a floor, it can give us a sense of closeness. And these columns, they are familiar. The form of them is inherently friendly. They invite us to lean against them. I wonder even if natural materials in their uniqueness, they give us permission to be our imperfect selves. In a bedroom, it doesn't have to be what it usually is, which is a bed in a box. Imagine waking up here. Have you ever woken up from a nap in the park and looked up at a tree? I wonder what we've forgotten that we need. And sometimes the reality is that we're in a box. In fact, a few years ago, we were asked to turn this box in Hong Kong into a Balinese landscape for a restaurant. And we found ways to bring comfort and closeness and texture, nature, inside of this space. More and more, we're bringing bamboo overseas. This is a sculptural volcano inside of a techie kind of warehouse space in Las Vegas. Thanks again to Atelier 1 for engineering the most problematic and complex Kirby membrane ever. Everything that we do, it grew out of the choice to use bamboo. In the simplest way, we chose bamboo because it's beautiful. And there are practical reasons that many of you might already know. It grows fast. Each pole only 3 years to fully mature. And then that root system, it keeps sending up a new generation of shoots every year for decades. It's unstoppable. It's also lightweight, with the tensile strength of steel by weight, the compressive strength of concrete. And this is not easy. We are designing for curving, tapering, hollow poles. No two poles alike, no straight lines. Sometimes, I have to confess, I dream of 2x4s, of sheetrock, of plywood, of steel, of controllable and reliable materials. But bamboo has taught us what it's like to be flexible, that we must be flexible. And this doesn't always happen in an office, staring at a desk and staring at a flat screen. We spend a lot of time on site, though lately, actually, this design team especially, we have been working from home across time zones remotely. Right now, it's the middle of the night here in Bali. And I think that all goes back to that point about flexibility. This is the structural model of Sharma Springs, a home in Bali that was made in real 3D in a shack on site. Now it's found its home in the permanent collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And here it is at night, glowing like a lightning bug. By the way, that model, it's a literal structural blueprint. And because of the varying tapered nature of each of the poles within it, for us, CAD drawings can really only be suggestive so far. A few years ago, Autodesk showed up. They scanned the structure, they compared them with scans of the model, and the similarity really blew their minds. There's so much yet to come. 1 billion years of evolution in nature gave us bamboo. Pair that with technology that is just right now being invented. This is the early days of an entirely new world of design. It's all about collaboration, about learning, also learning by teaching. So we share what we've discovered through our course called Bamboo U. And always what we're doing is we're asking the bamboo what it would be good at, what it wants to become. We play with it, we push its limits a little bit, but we seek to understand it and to design into its strengths. Whether on site, at the office, or at home, we have to be flexible like the bamboo. We have to be ready, in fact, to unlearn our training, to reinvent our own rules. For the future, we will need to redesign how we make buildings, objects, medicine, so many things. And to do so, we must insist on goodness. It's not enough to be a little less bad. And we're going to have to do this with materials that will not run out on us. Imagine growing the material for a whole city in just 4 years. What else is out there? How do we get out of our own heads and make sure to keep listening? We need ways of thinking that are flexible, somehow future-proof. Change is inevitable. Our impact on the world, it's inevitable. And as designers, I really believe that it's on us to define that new world. Thank you.
Charlie?
Let me take over if this works. Good. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much, Elora. That was truly amazing and inspirational. Bamboo is such an intriguing material. And I think it's the fastest growing of all plants. How's that for the power of photosynthesis? Here's a picture of photosynthesis. This is what I want to focus on. Photosynthesis and the water cycle. It really is the mother of all circular economies. And when you strip away all the chaff, it's the only thing that really matters for the future of the planet and us, as it provides all of our food, our fresh water, the oxygen we breathe, most of our energy, it mops up CO2 and regulates the climate. The process looks simple enough. Carbon dioxide and water are converted by sunlight into sugar and starch. But if we look a bit more closely, it gets delightfully complex. A cross-section through a leaf. And then we look at the pathways in that cross-section of the leaf, and it gets even more complicated again. And then if we dig into that even further, the complexity is even more astounding. So much so that no one has yet been able to create a single blade of grass. Yet humanity has been chipping away at this process as an unintended consequence of civilization and growth, breaking the water cycle. And the effects, as we all know, include more extreme droughts, fires, desertification, floods, rising sea levels, and global warming. That's New York City, and it's certainly not made of bamboo. We're currently building the equivalent of one New York City every month, and we're projected to continue to do so every month for the next 40 years. Like most major cities, London, Paris, Cairo, Baghdad, etc., it was once forest or farmland. But lack of water also leads to food insecurity, which in turn leads to conflict, and the lack of clean water is the world's #1 killer. We often hear that the next war will be over water, but water conflicts are happening all the time. There have been nearly 500 in the last decade, and unsurprisingly, they cluster in the most arid parts of the world. To quote Bob Marley, "A hungry man is an angry man." So where did it all start to go wrong? Some people blame the Industrial Revolution. Thomas Newcomen invented the first productive steam engine 300 years ago, but I think it's a bit unfair to blame him. Rather, let's start in 1950. That was the year I was born. It wasn't all my fault, but it's fair to say we're all to blame, my generation in particular. Look at this graph. The world population has trebled in my lifetime, and everyone needs food and water and fresh air to survive, as well as air to breathe. But while world populations have trebled over the last 70 years, rainfall hasn't. So how do we manage such spectacular growth? Well, in lots of ways, but primarily through converting forest to farmland. Since 1950, half of the world's forests have been lost, and all that biodiversity lost with it. But the destruction still continues. Some 20 million acres are destroyed annually. Sometimes it's accidental because they're too dry, as we see in Australia and California now. But most often they're burnt deliberately to create farmland, as in Brazil and Indonesia. So do we have to choose between having food and having forests? We all know that trees are the best line of defense against global warming, but who is willing to starve in order to cool the planet? Let's just have another look at photosynthesis. This is 6 years of photosynthesis from NASA, 1997 to 2003. And look how dynamic it is. Look at the huge fluctuations, especially in the desert areas of Africa and Australia. In fact, even over this short period of time, you can see a general drying up, especially in Australia. But also look closely at all the deserts, the Middle East, North Africa, South Africa, most of Australia, Mexico and California. How difficult would it be to nudge up the green areas, and what would be the benefits? Well, interesting. A study came out of NASA a few years ago asking that very question. What would be the effect of reforestation in North Africa and Australia? And the conclusion is startling. It would achieve not the 2 degrees of cooling that we need to achieve, but a whopping 4 to 8 degrees. Is that achievable in practice? Well, check out the hottest place on Earth. It's not Baghdad or Riyadh, but Death Valley in California. It often tops the world record for high temperature because it seldom rains there. But in 2016, a torrential downpour, all 2 inches of it occurred, and the place was carpeted in flowers. Just 1 month later, cooling the place down by tens of degrees. Quite astonishing. A great study from MIT looked at the effect of intensified agriculture in the American Midwest and Great Plains. The region has experienced a 5-fold increase in agricultural productivity during the last century, and the study compared temperature and rainfall from the mid-20s with the mid-70s. Hey presto, the intensification of agriculture cooled the region down by around 2.5 degrees and increased rainfall by 25%, at a time when the rest of the world was getting warmer and drier. So how does this work? In a simplified explanation, what comes down must go up. It's the water cycle. This illustrates how the humidity of air coming from the sea is augmented by transpiration from trees and plants. Only when the air is completely saturated with water do clouds form, and only then can it rain, most often on the highest ground where the air is cooler. Chop the trees down and build a car park, and what happens? The water cycle is broken. Clouds don't form because there is not enough humidity in the air to make rain. That is the unintended consequence of what we call progress. So, what can we do about that? Well, quite a lot. You may have heard that water is a finite resource, but actually it isn't. It's an infinite resource. Water goes around in cycles from rain to plants to rain and back again, although most of it drains back to the sea, which makes it too salty for plants or us to survive. We have no shortage of water on the planet, it's just that most of it is too salty and in the wrong place. So what if we take seawater, evaporate it and convert it to fresh water? Let me show you a few examples. This extreme desert in Saudi Arabia is just 150 kilometers from a lush vegetated area in Oman. They both get roughly the same amount of rainfall, but the lush Omani landscape benefits from fog and mist off the sea, which blows inland in a region called Dhofar, or summer. It's called the Kharif, or the wind of plenty. Here is an example of a seawater greenhouse we built in one of the most arid and hottest parts of Australia, on the edge of the outback. It emulates the Kharif, or the wind of plenty in Oman, by evaporating seawater to cool and humidify the environment. Inside, we're growing tomatoes in a near perfect climate. This project, which I have to say appeared completely nuts to most people at the time, has since been expanded 100 times its original size. It's now 20 hectares. And it's producing 17,000 tons of tomatoes a year, which meets 15% of Australia's demand. And it's driven entirely by sunlight and seawater. It's all very high tech, but recently we converted the concept to work in a much simpler way. We're now testing this approach in Somaliland. The painting at the top is Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, in 150 years ago. The photo below is a refugee camp in Hargeisa today. In many ways, this super simplified approach seems much better suited to such hot, arid parts of the world where famine follows drought has been the familiar mantra for recent decades. It's essentially a large Bedouin tent structure with seawater evaporators at either end. And here's our first crop of tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, and salt. So here's a rather radical suggestion. What if CO2 were not the poison of our era, but the feedstock of a carbon sequestering agricultural economy? We just need to add nutrients and water. For sure, using seawater for cooling the Horn of Africa, the Middle East and North Africa to plant trees and grow crops has a cost, but that cost is super trivial when compared with the cost of not doing it. As an example, the one-off cost of using this approach to make the entire country of Somaliland self-sufficient in fresh produce is around 400 million. Yes, that's a lot of money, but it's only 1% of the annual aid budget to sub-Saharan Africa. So what are we missing? Well, I think maybe Joni Mitchell got it about right in her song, Big Yellow Taxi. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They pay paradise and put up a parking lot. I'd like to end with one more quote by Colin Tudge, who wrote a fantastic book called The Secret Life of Trees. The prospects for humanity are somewhere between glorious and dire. It is hard to be more precise. And if you have any lingering doubts about that, it's worth checking out David Attenborough's latest film on iPlayer. It's called Extinction, and it's truly unsettling. So thank you. Back to Morag.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, that was fantastic, both of you. And we have lots and lots of questions, particularly for Laura. I think we're still waiting more to come in from Charlie, but I think you can answer some of them together, possibly. So they are specific questions, Laura, about certain things. So I'm going to read them out so I don't get them wrong. So from this, I haven't got who this person who sent this question, but I'm sure they're listening. Are there any practical planning permission reasons why such building techniques could not be used effectively in Birmingham, UK? What is the longevity of bamboo, of such material, they wrote?
I'm so glad to say I know nothing about the planning permits in Birmingham, but I'm sure they have a lot of reasons why we shouldn't right now. Although I think that if the data was looked at and that there was a receptivity, that there would actually be a lot of applicable context to use bamboo. And I think perhaps those would begin in the interior and then in the semi-structural, and then ultimately, after proving itself, in more structural elements of a building. And it regardless of urban or rural or cold or hot climate.
So Sriram has asked, how is the waterproofing done on the bamboo roots?
So there's no such thing as waterproofing yet. We're waiting for technology to catch up and provide us with coating solutions that can really protect it in the long term. But all of our buildings, we add a layer of waterproof coating depending on the situation to add some water resistance, I should say, in the areas that are exposed to UV and to rainwater. And that is kind of the basic key to the maintenance of the building. But as you would with wood, add a layer of varnish now and then, or oil or tung oil. There's a lot of possibilities there.
So Gretchen Dre has asked, what is the process for bending the bamboo?
Well, usually we only bend bamboo once we've split it up into bundles or into laminates, because that's where the flexibility is really unleashed. But it is possible to bend certain species of bamboo a certain amount with heating techniques.
Okay, so then this is this is more about you. So this is from Joel, and he said, you started as a fine artist. So how did you start and pursue your career in this field?
I was tricked into it by my family. I had no proper understanding of what this world of design and construction is, but it's been an incredible journey.
And the last one for Laura, just because I'm waiting, I was going to give you half and half, but I haven't got some for Charlie yet, so I'm just waiting. So that's why I'm just bombarding you with questions, Laura, sorry.
I'm ready, keep going.
Is the bamboo you use grown on a farm plantation, or is it found in the wild?
So it's a lot of backyard farms. A lot of families up in the mountains have steep land that's really not usable for much else. And bamboo just grows. There's a lot of springs in the hillsides as well, and it loves water. So it grows kind of reasonably wild. You can also cultivate it. My friend Arif Rabik creates these systems for cultivating it in the villages and really using that as a way to optimize it, and then as a resource for community-based agroforestry. So lots of different ways it can happen, but it just grows wherever it gets the chance.
So somebody, Marley Greenway, is it practical to reforest with bamboo? It seems logical, though although it grows so fast and sequesters so much carbon, is there any negative impacts on using it to reforest areas?
I think it's one of those species that naturally comes in, like mine-tailing land or mudslides or somewhere that's been burnt. It's one of the first species that comes in. It brings the water back to damaged land. So it's that's what part of its natural purpose in the ecosystem.
Okay, Charlie, I've got a question from Sydney Davidson. Would creating a forest in the desert other dry areas be prone to forest fires?
Well, I think the answer to that is the opposite. The reason we have fires in California and Australia is because the place is too dry. And it's dry because of the cities and the development and all the rest of it. We don't have forest fires in the UK because it's too damp. You literally cannot set fire to a forest. And it's a question of if you've got enough vegetation around, that is the forest inhibitor. Bush was doing something rather weird yesterday, blaming the forest rangers in California for not sweeping up the dead leaves. But normally the leaves that drop off a tree get eaten by the worms and taken into the soil and get broken down into nutrients by the fungi and all the rest of it. And so then they're not normally a fire hazard. It's just that for whatever reason, the place got too dry.
Okay, here's another one from Patrick Bellio. Hello, Patrick. Can you elaborate how you access the cool seawater for the process? Is there a pipe down to the water, or is it taken directly from the sea?
Do you know, that's the easy bit. Originally, we thought we'd have to put pipes in the sea, and that's a difficult thing to do because of waves and storms and engineering. And we found that in pretty well every location we've ever built a greenhouse, if we dig a well on the beach within 100 or 200 meters of the greenhouse itself, the water that comes out of the well, just like a normal well inland, is perfectly pure, clean seawater that's been filtered by the sand. And so it's the best possible easy solution. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, from John, how has this technique not been picked up by more countries on the coast that suffer drought and food shortages? Is it a cost issue? And how can we do this on grassroots level?
I don't think it's a cost issue. It's just to most people who have any experience of agriculture, growing crops, it just seems very counterintuitive. And so it's difficult for people to get an understanding of. Everybody knows you can't grow crops with seawater because it's too salty. So the idea of a seawater greenhouse doesn't really make sense. And also the idea of a greenhouse in a hot, sunny place doesn't make much sense either, because greenhouses tend to be in cool, temperate regions like Holland and the UK, and rarely do you have greenhouses in the Middle East, although some people have tried it with varying degrees of success. The difference here is that this isn't a hot house in the normal sense of greenhouse, but it's a cool house. And I think it's fair to say it's much cheaper to cool a greenhouse in North Africa or the Middle East using seawater than it is to heat and light one in the UK using gas.
At what scale does a seawater greenhouse system work, as your installation seems to indicate that they have to be super large?
No, that one I showed you in Somaliland is less than 1,000 square meters. And to the left of it, I don't know if you remember the picture, there was another little greenhouse which was 500 square meters, which we call the nursery. That's a sort of a more protected space. But no, the scale is they can be infinitely small or infinitely large.
Yeah, and so this, I think, is my last question, and then hopefully you can have a nice discussion. So Ben Yers mentioned in his book Biomimicry, are you guys thinking about how you can create effective plant polycultures in these spaces rather than monocultures?
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point. And it's so much more interesting to do that. What I didn't quite explain properly with the Somaliland project is that the purpose of the greenhouse is not just to cool itself, so you can grow tomatoes and things inside it, but also to cool the region around it. We've noticed that it has an effect over a much bigger area, creating what we call an oasis sort of condition. And so that is ideally suited to mixed cropping along the kind of agroforestry approach to mixing orchards and date palms, say, with root crops, potatoes and carrots, that sort of thing.
Okay, so we've come to the end of our questions. And so now it would be great if Charlie and Elora have a discussion about what you've just presented, or whatever you want to talk about, really. Over to you.
Fantastic.
I just wanted to say thank you to Charlie for reaching out to me and inviting me to speak. I think this is one of my first chances to really be in a room full of so many RDIs, and I was just nominated last year. So I'm really proud to be here. And Charlie, it was so exciting meeting you last year at the VNA when we spoke together. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Laura. And I want to thank you for saying yes. Brilliant.
My first impulse was to say, let's build a beautiful bamboo greenhouse. So I hope that there's a way to realize that in the future, because it just seems that this sense of an oasis is something that can be a space that also potentially welcomes people. Do you have that happening in the greenhouses? Do people visit them and tour them or spend time inside of them?
We do a bit, but they tend to be in quite remote places. So it's only kind of the bravest souls that manage to sort of trek out to these remote locations. We don't get that many visitors. But as it happens, we started work on a project for a greenhouse in Colombia, up in the northwest region, which is a very desertified region, where the Wayu people live, and they suffer quite badly from all the social problems going on there. And of course, there's very little vegetation in this region, and there's very little water. It's actually a desert. But just further down the coast, of course, in Colombia, there's lots of bamboo. And here's a question then: is it, if you can access the bamboo, is it stable enough to build in a hot, arid place, or does that affect its performance in some way?
Oh no, it just has to be dried properly so that it doesn't crack excessively in those conditions. But there's treatment processes and drying processes that should be able to account for that, for sure.
When we started that project in Somaliland, we originally thought that it would be best if we could build the greenhouse out of bamboo. And in fact, we designed it out of bamboo because we knew the bamboo grew in Ethiopia. And there are some amazing examples of structures in Ethiopia where people weave houses. Really fabulous, beautiful, beautiful stuff. But we tried and couldn't find out where to get it from. There was just, there was no kind of web page where you add to basket, as it were. And we couldn't find any contact details. And we thought, oh, well, actually, this is all a bit risky because we didn't want to do too many firsts all at once. But certainly, if we would replicate the thing and expand it in Somaliland, I'd much rather use bamboo because we could get it from Ethiopia much easier than getting it from the UK.
Well, it's just early days, and I feel like someone who comes to Bamboo U will go home to that part of the world and start up some steps of the ways to process and work with it to make things like this possible on a more grassroots level in all sorts of parts of the world.
It's obviously a very thirsty crop to grow, and in Bali, how much rain do you get? Is it really serious?
It's raining right now. Oh. It's like kind of the edge of the monsoon, so it's not super intense, but we get a lot of rain, and there's a lot of water just pouring out of the hillsides here, so it's really great. But I think that there's just so many species of bamboo that they can grow in a lot of different situations all around the world, on every continent. They have different properties.
Well, we grow bamboo in England, but we can't grow the big fat stuff for structural purposes.
Yeah.
We can only grow the sort of thin ornamental types of bamboo, which I guess is because it's not hot enough. Is that the limiting factor?
I don't know. I think there's different scenarios for different species, different temperatures and everything. I was curious hearing about your background, and I wondered if you look forward from, I don't know, your teens and see what you've been up to now, and also just the sort of situation in the world that makes what you're doing so important. What would you think of all of this? What would you think of yourself, and what would you think of all of this?
Goodness gracious. I've only got to where I am just by looking and observing and making mistakes and kind of seeing things go wrong and testing out ideas and trying them. And so in a funny kind of way, although I Morag described, I started off as a lighting designer. It was really interest in light photosynthesis, what light does. Why does certain colors of light cheer people up, other colors make people depressed? Why are plants green? Why is bamboo green? What is it about the light that it does that makes the plant green, or what is it doing to the light? And actually that's really, it's such an intriguing question, because most plants are green and nobody knows why. You know, solar panels are green. I mean, a plant.
Photosynthesis?
Yeah, but why is photosynthesis?
Why? Right.
It could be black. You know, if its job is to absorb sunlight and turn it into sugar, black is a better absorber. And in fact, you get things like copper beeches, you get very dark trees, and you get very dark pine type trees. But pretty much green is the universal color. And I mean, it could be that if you're a tree or a plant, you don't actually know you're green. You're using it for some kind of signaling process. I mean, they don't have eyes. They don't see in the same way as us. And if you put on your infrared spectacles and look at a tree, it doesn't look green at all. In infrared light, it sort of is glowing with infrared radiation because it's reflecting heat.
Wow.
And if you're a moth, then it looks black because you're seeing the thing in ultraviolet light. And if you illuminate a leaf in UV, it actually goes very dark. So it depends who you are, what actual color it really is. We just see it as green.
Does the degree of green speak to something about how it's like, well, as I tell my son, if it's more green, it's better for you. But does that have a parallel in like whether it's releasing more CO2 or signaling to us anything?
No, it doesn't work quite like that. But I think what the plants are doing, if you think of a forest and a canopy, and you've got big oak trees and green leaves, and you've got other plants growing underneath, the plants are signaling to each other by the type of light and the color they get. So the oak shoot that is growing underneath the big oak tree recognizes that it's got a big tall thing above it. And what it's got to do is grow tall really fast. But if you plant an oak in the middle of a field where there's nothing above it, it doesn't grow up very fast. It grows wide and takes up as much room as it can. So the plants are responding to the light regime that's created by all the plants around them. And I guess bamboo must be doing that too, because it wants to shoot up towards the light.
It's job.
It's job, yeah. It's like all plants do, but because it's, if you like, shaded by other bamboo and it's growing in clumps, then there's a race going on. There's a race. Who can get to the top fastest? That's doing its job.
Yeah, in fact, it shoots up full diameter. So it's like, goes up like a train. It doesn't grow up and then expand like a tree. It just it's fully grown as it leaps out of the air.
It must be there is clear sky above it to grow towards it, rather than, it wouldn't grow like that if it was in the shade of a bigger tree, would it?
Well, it's in the shade of itself quite often because it's a clump. Yes. And so there's one species that's called duri, which means thorns, and it actually winds its way through itself trying to seek the light. And those are some of the naturally curving, beautiful pieces that we get to work with. We cheat sometimes. We cut them a little to make them curve in the way we might wish them, for example, for a handrail. But when you can find that organically curving, beautiful piece just from nature, that's where the real magic is.
Quite astonishing, quite astonishing. So we must try and grow it in the Horn of Africa, and we must certainly make the next greenhouse out of it. And work on the I'd love to know more about your project in Colombia, because that looked absolutely stunning. Was it a school that you clicked
so
on?
In Tulum, Mexico is an upcoming green school, and there's a very cool team of bamboo builders who have been innovating there. And so we designed the building according to the techniques that they have already been working with, and according to the bamboo that they have that's different than the bamboo here. And so that's been a really exciting process.
And that's because of the climate, or the variety, or what is it?
In fact, when we asked them to find some bamboo similar to what we use here. They did find the same species in a small quantity, but just because of what was most plentiful near where they were, they had developed techniques that were really suited to that. And so I just think that that we need to escape this sense that like that a bamboo building looks a certain way. We've certainly redefined that. 10 years ago, you thought a bamboo building looked like a tiki hut. And now people have a perception that what we build is what they look like. But in fact, if you start looking around in the bushes, you'll see little practices popping up in different parts of the world that find totally different inspiration sources based on their material, their own personality, their needs, and their climate. All of these things can result in such a variety of different types of, I guess, vernaculars or styles. And I think that's what's been exciting to see. Just kind of, you know, nature is so bountiful in the way that it innovates. And I think that there's so much room for that in design and in humans that flies in the face of our sort of very recent tradition of international, like one way to do things, one TV show to watch, one set of celebrities to pay attention to perspective. And we have the chance to really branch back out into the true range of natural variation that nature shows us is all the time.
Am I right in thinking you treat the bamboo with boron to extend it to stop it rotting? Because boron is also used as a fire suppressant, and I imagine, does that make them fire resistant, fire retardant? Because that would be a major issue. Because there were two questions about that, planning and would it do for reforestation?
So it improves the fire. There's a lot of different ways that one measures the fire, the way it burns apparently, but the boron, the salt in there helps. And from what I understand, the tests sort of have showed that it is comparable to the hardest hardwoods. So it's still in the world of wood, but it is less flammable or more slowly flammable than the hardest hardwood, which is, I think, the opposite of what people might expect.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, which is terrific.
But I mean, there's so many natural resources out there that we discard based on one factor, like, oh, it must be flammable. And when we start to look at these possibilities and then pair them with technologies, or not even like super low tech technologies, like soaking. So soaking bamboo in boron is has also been achieved traditionally, sometimes by soaking it in the sea. Traditional villages sometimes soaked bamboo in the sea. That succeeded in getting enough of the sap out and enough of the salt in that they could use it as timber for longer lasting structures. So these sort of simple concepts or these like advanced technological like understandings can really lead us to unleash the potential of so many resources that we've just been overlooking.
Sure. Do you ever have examples of forest fires of bamboo? Does it ever catch fire?
I have no idea. I've never heard of such a thing. I think it's way too wet.
I think so, yeah. That's what I would have thought.
There's literally like water inside of the nodes sometimes.
Exactly.
It's like putting a coconut on fire.
Like it's a grass.
Fresh green coconut.
And you can't set fire to grass unless it's sort of thoroughly desiccated. But once it's growing, it won't burn. Amazing.
Yes.
So let's do it. Next one, onwards and upwards.
I'm seeing the comments here. There's a question talking about coming to speak in Manchester. Yes, I'd love to speak in Manchester once we can travel the world again.
It's wet there too.
Ah, yes. I've heard that.
Mind you're zooming in.
Very good.
So can I just, we're up to our time that we had allotted. Do you want to carry on talking a little bit more, or would you want to, do you like to finish now? It's up to, you know, it's up to you if you feel there's still things you want to say.
I think if there's any questions that have popped up since we were talking, that we're maybe happy to take another question or two before the end.
Okay.
I'd be happy to carry on chatting for the next 6 months, but I think it's worth saying to everybody that this is being recorded, I think, and it's going to be put online in a day or two. So if anybody missed it or thought it was so exciting they'd like to see it again, then it's going to be there. So at least we've started it and got the ball rolling, and we can follow this up as time goes by.
Okay, Laura, I've got a question. Okay. I'm a student pursuing spatial design in Mumbai, India. I came across Bamboo you on Instagram a few years ago and continue to drool over it each day. Laura, you're a big inspiration to me. Is it a question? And I hope sometime connect with you. That's not a question. Where's the question? But anyway, she loves you, so that's brilliant. I think or it might be a man. Anyway, there you. So that's good. No, so I can't see the question there. So or maybe.
I have a feeling that we will run into each other at Bamboo U one of these days when the world opens up for travel again.
I've got. Oh, here's one for Charlie, but it hasn't come through yet. So let's see. But that was such a wonderful, such an inspiring talk, and so fascinating because you've got so many things in common, and so, you know, but also tackling things in different ways, which is really fascinating. And you were exactly as we imagined our first talk to be. So thank you so much for having the conversation tonight. And do you want one more question, Charlie? It's come through. Okay, I'm going to read this before I read it out loud, just to check. Population 7. Okay. Do you believe humankind's survival? Okay. With the global population at 7-88, do you believe humankind's survival, prosperity, and population growth can be sustained upwards to 20-308 with strategic development of seawater distillation-based water and food systems? Do you believe that's possible, Charlie?
As I finished the presentation, I said that the prospects for humanity are somewhere between glorious and dire, and it's difficult to be more precise. And I think that's really the answer to the question. There is no doubt that it is this huge population and this huge growth of population that puts so much pressure on the natural world and on biodiversity, and why we've got so much extinction going on and all of those things. And I just don't see that stopping, actually. And I think the more people we add, the worse it's going to get. And apparently it's going to get to 10 billion and then level off. And I think we're in with a chance if we kind of make the right decisions now. But if we continue to make the wrong decisions, which we seem to be doing, broadly speaking, then I think it all looks to me like a bit of a slippery slope. But we have a chance.
Okay, can we have another thing end on a high note? Yeah, I mean,
we have a chance because the resources are there. We are not short of we are not short of land. We're not short of desert areas. There's plenty of space to do it, and the technology is not very expensive, and it's not very difficult. It just happens to be not the way people tend to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think we're out of questions at the moment, but there have been lots of questions. They're just quite hard to go through everything and separate them out. So what we're going to do is we might send you, Laura and Charlie, the questions, and maybe you could quickly answer them, and then we can put them on Instagram so that we try and answer everybody's questions. And if any more questions come in, we'll try and answer them. You know, well, hopefully you won't mind doing that, and so that everybody gets the answers to their questions. And so thank you. And I just want to put a plug in for our next talk, which is Malcolm Garrett and Michael Wolf on called Yours Truthfully on the 29th of September at 6 o'clock. And hope some of you or all of you will join us. And thank you for joining us tonight. It's been amazing evening, such fascinating listening, and great questions, and a brilliant audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well done, Morag.
Thank you.